Civic Tech Growing Up, a talk by Cyd Harrell, recorded August 25th, 2021.
All right. Sorry,
Let's
do you
do
mind?
this. Yeah, go for it.
All right. Thank you very much. This is Code for Puerto Rico Presents. It's our first talk series. We have a special night planned for all of you guys. Yes, please do use the chat. We want to know that you're there and say hi to everybody.
Hey, Meredith.
If you want to go to the next slide. So this is us in Code for Puerto Rico. What we wanted to do is to start having these like civic tech and just these technology talks for the community. I mean, as many of you know, my name is La Torre. I am the co-founder of Seriously Creative, and we're a design thinking firm. I'm not necessarily a techie, but I am part of the core team for Puerto Rico's Brigade of Code for Puerto Rico. So I just want us to become a community, and we decided to start these, Code for Puerto Rico Presents sessions, so we can have all kinds of talks, all kinds of conversations where we can learn from different subjects and benchmark from each other. So that said, the next slide, we want everybody to be social. So please do make sure to, anything that you want to highlight, use our different social media. You can follow us too. So you can do tweets, Facebook, Instagram. Also, after that, we'll review this so you can join our chat and you can stay connected to us. We have a meetup and we have YouTube and all those things. This session is being recorded, just so you know, and it is in webinar mode for right now. Because it's more about the talk. But once the talk is over, you're welcome to join and ask your questions in person. As well as if you would like to participate more softly, you can go ahead and leave your questions in the chat. There's two different chats, and I'm gonna go over the platform real quickly. On the right-hand side, you see that you have two different chats: the event and the session chat. Make sure that you're in the session chat, so you're here, and anything that you have, any comments, highlights, or questions that you have, go ahead and throw them there. We have polls, and also you can use the Q&A. I'll be monitoring it for any questions you may want to use. So you can use the chat or the Q&A. On the left-hand side is the navigation of the event. So right now we're in sessions, and we'll be here for most of the event. After the event is over, we'll be able to do a little bit of networking. So that said, I think we're ready for the next slide, and that's you, Freud.
All right, so like Anjamil said, we are a team here in Code for Puerto Rico, and these are your three co-captains. My name is Freilan Irizarry Rivera. I am one of the OG members of Code for Puerto Rico, and established the brigade in 2020. With me is Jose Adrian Padilla Feliciano, and you already met Anjamil La Torre. We would like to mention that we are open to any feedback. If anything goes wrong, if you feel uncomfortable, if you don't feel safe, if you just need to talk about something, please reach out at team@codeforpuertorico.org. We are incredibly available for all of our community, so please just feel free to reach out. So let's start really quick with what is Code for America. From a 30,000 foot view, Code for America is a nonprofit organization that dedicates itself to helping state and local governments to achieve their needs in the technology realm. So Code for America, from its founding, is very much ingrained in what we call civic tech. It's very important to make the distinction that Code for America is highly focused on the interaction of citizens with their government, And with that, they help the brigades such as us to not only achieve our goals, but also have the knowledge that they've gotten over the years. There's a couple of important projects for in Code for America that we want to highlight a bit. You can see more of Code for America in their website, codeforamerica.org. But just to continue forward, we have Code for America has worked in criminal justice reform. One example of a project is the Clear My Record. The Clear My Record is done entirely by Code for America in association with, I think it's, it started with the California government, I think, and it just has evolved to encompass multiple jurisdictions in the United States. It was also one of the principal topics in last year's National Day of Civic Hacking, if I remember correctly. So if you are interested in not only learning more about criminal justice reform, what does it mean to dismiss convictions and clearing your record, or if you want to help, this is definitely a project that you should check out. Another really interesting project is getting your refund, getting your tax refund. There is in multiple jurisdictions across the US, there are issues with getting refunds and actually filing your taxes, depending on the means of the person. This project is highly focused on helping people that might not know how to fill their taxes to just get that done and also receive a free way of not only filing taxes, but also getting refunds from local governments. You might know that companies like Intuit and what's the name? Forgot the name of their product. They usually have sneaky ways of helping people file their taxes, but then charging them a large amounts of money that they might not be able to afford. This project helps with that issue. Close and dear to our heart, as part of the Code for America Brigade Network, Contratos PR is, I might say, the first official Code for Puerto Rico project. This project is highly focused on consuming the Office of the Controller's website and data so that we can then make this data more searchable, have better interfaces for discoverability. And we also wrapped all of this into an API that's free to use, that people with a more tech-savvy background can then make their own applications. The whole premise of this is transparency and keeping government honest, especially when it comes to contracts. And a newer project, and newer, I use it loosely, this was last year's, was Para Votar. Para Votar was highly focused in educating constituents in Puerto Rico to understand not only the intricacies of the vote, but also understand how to vote. Our papeleta is a bit confusing to a lot of people. We have multiple ways of ruining a ballot. And what this project was able to do is not only make it simpler for people to understand how to vote, they also made it available for people to practice their vote, download a PDF of that example ballot. And not only that, but it also brought together a community of like-minded organizations that were also trying to help people just get to a point where they could actually vote. And this specific project has been featured by Code for America in their blog, which we're very proud of. But what we're mostly proud of is having received messages back from the community saying, my 75-year-old grandma finally understood how to do a mixed candidacy ballot, and now she has the knowledge and feels comfortable enough to make her vote count. Or having teachers saying that they're teaching civics to elementary school students by using this application. So projects like these are what we're all about. Civic Tech is what we're all about. And that is also what we're here to listen our guest speaker talk about. Jose?
So today we are joined by Cyd Harrell. Cyd is a civic design consultant and author of a Civic Technologist practical guide. She's also an alum for Code for America and 18F. Cyd is a highly versatile and collaborative user experience expert with 12 plus years of success improving online and software products. She likes calling herself a user researcher and UX evangelist, but has also worked as QA person, marketer, service designer, product person, strategist, and recently a chief of staff. She helps governments and sometimes companies to make technology work for their constituents and staff. She also teaches workshops on research methods at all levels and speaks about a variety of UX and civic topics. Cyd is a mentor to UX practitioners and loves connecting people. And on a personal level, she says if stuck in an airport, she takes haiku commissions. Today, she is here as our first guest speaker for Code for Puerto Rico Presents with her talk, Civic Tech Growing Up. Thank you so much for being here, Cyd.
Thank you, Jose. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for reminding me of a time when I was bored in airports. It's been a couple of years, or a year and a half anyway, since I've been to one. Hello from San Francisco, California, about 3,600 miles away. I'm just delighted to talk to another group in the Civic Tech family. And I have some slides, but we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A because I'd love to hear about some of the great work that Jose just described as well.
Before you start, Cyd, let me just tell people, for viewing purposes, you can double click. First of all, Hopin keeps changing. So there's like a small square on the right-hand side bottom. If you hit that, it will amplify to full screen. However, if you prefer to see the slides bigger or see Cyd bigger, you decide which screen you want to amplify. So it's just a matter of double clicking on whatever it is that you want to see bigger. For right now, Freud, Jose, and let's just leave screen and come back when she's done. Please use the chat for insights. You can do GIFs, you can do all kinds of reactions. So let's get active, all right? All right, Cyd, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. So since I've met several of you, I feel like I'm saying hello again. And I wanted to start with my very first hackathon ever back in 2012, where I nervously came to one of the government buildings in San Francisco and offered an unconference session for the first time. That blown up post-it is from a low-res photograph, but it says, user experience, citizen experience, how to get ideas and data from the public, and how to get the design and research community involved. And I really had no idea if anyone would want to talk about that, but they did. And that was one of the things that made me eventually move my career into civic tech. This little book is on the screen, and now, no matter which video you have pinned, came out last September. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that are in it, but I'm grateful to everyone who's bought a copy and sent me feedback. And one of the things I want to do today is encourage some of you to think about writing a book. So I attended my first hackathon about 10 years ago and got really excited about the idea of the citizen experience. I wouldn't use that word in the same way today, recognizing that it is exclusionary at a federal level and not always very descriptive at a local level. But I went from there to working on a voting project. So Para Votar was very near and dear to my heart, to working at CFA and 18F. And right now, for the last 3 years, I've been consulting with the California court system. Judicial tech is very different, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're up to there just to show you some of that. I also want to note that the experience of coming into Civic Tech and feeling like we're a little bit lost, like has probably happened to most of us on our first project, happened to me again on my first day with the judicial project. I proudly told everyone about my past government experience in the vein that, you know, you can trust me, I know somewhat what I'm doing. And I explained about my work with the federal government and with municipal governments and Code for America, and they gave me this look. Why would we care? And I got all, wait a second, what is happening? And they said, we're not the government. We are the courts. And I sat there in a government building, a state government building for California, with a bunch of people who I'd been emailing with at .gov email addresses, and I got really confused. And what happened was they said, well, we're another branch. And I discovered that everyone in the court system refers to what they do as working in the branch, and that part of the problem is that the government is often one side of a court case. So someone might be suing the government might be prosecuting a suspected criminal. And the court doesn't feel like it can take on the idea of being part of the government because that would compromise the fairness that is the top promise of the courts. So I can't tell you how many times I've been rocked back on my heels as a civic technologist and told, you need to learn some more. So let's take us all back a little bit. What is civic tech? And I want to tell you, I know there's not one right way, and I'm not here to tell you there's one right way, but I will propose a couple of definitions that our community might find useful. We want to access services and exercise our rights and build our communities with the ease and respect that really good digital technology can offer us. And we also want our public digital goods to be as good as the ones that Amazon or Google makes. And if our public digital infrastructure was as good too, that would help us a lot when something happens like, say, a pandemic, or here a wildfire or an earthquake, or perhaps nearer to you, a hurricane, where we had access, backed up robust infrastructure to keep people connected, where we could still access government services when something happens. I think about half of our courthouses in California are open to some degree right now. Few of them are closed from fires, but a lot of them are only operating online due to the pandemic. So when I think about public digital goods, when I think about civic tech, when I think about what we want, my mind always turns to that infrastructure as well. Government in the United States is complicated, to say the least. It is not one thing. There are easily 25,000 or so entities that you might think of as governments, and working with any of them in my book counts as civic tech, as well as a lot of non-governmental and community organizations. So how do we decide what to do and where to work? Some of it involves getting really familiar with which level of government does what. In California, sheriffs are county level, local police are city level. They have law enforcement responsibilities, but not exactly the same ones. Counties keep track of vital records, and they administer state programs like elections and public benefits. But cities mostly take care of building permitting and parking and traffic enforcement, but counties take care of transit and roads. But parks have both levels. Schools and libraries may be either. Figuring out just the organization that you want to work with can be a really difficult piece of actually getting done the public good that you want to do. But I think it helps us to have kind of a typology of projects that civic technologists work on. So I put this together as part of writing the book just to help us categorize some of the things we do. So there's service delivery. That's probably the clearest piece. Love the comment there saying all levels may do all things. And if they did it poorly, it's really hard to figure out who's accountable. But I think often civic technologists help with one of these 5 types of project, just delivering services better, working on infrastructure like opening data, pulling APIs, writing APIs, helping with, in the pandemic, it has been simple things like setting up Zoom and cloud services for governments. Sometimes there are purpose-built tools that only governments need. Mutual aid has been an enormous focus. Community support, recovery, community strengthening, and citizen engagement around planning and voting and other types of deliberative process. Figuring out how we want to work and what we want to do, one of the most important things to look at as we grow up and don't just go to hackathons is what's the policy status of the thing that we want to work on? There has been quite an evolution here in California of policy about cannabis. In 1995, it was illegal for all purposes here, as in most of the US. We had a mayor who started making it a low enforcement priority in the late 90s. Soon after, we got a medical marijuana law. And eventually, after a few more years, we now have full legalization with state licensed dispensaries for recreational purchases. And I'm using that as a bit of a frame to think about the question of expungement, which Jose mentioned in talking about Code for America's work on Clear My Record. So for people who were previously convicted of a marijuana offense, now that it's fully legal, the state can expunge their record. That works in California, but it wouldn't work in Texas, where there is an explicit policy against that. Thinking about situations you might find, you sometimes find a messy policy that kind of favors what you want. So sometimes it's not clear whether a particular government really wants to register all eligible voters, or whether in fact they might prefer to not. In the cases where government policy is against what you want to do or messy, technologists don't have a lot that we can do, although we can support political and movement efforts, which are some of the best ways to work on those kinds of problems. If there's a clear policy that favors what you want to do, but the implementation is terrible, that is one of the best places for us to work. If you look at what happened with a program called Get CalFresh to help people in California get food benefits more easily, in that case, there was a policy that said we would like to enroll everybody who is eligible for food stamps. And there was a terribly messy set of forms and interviews and bureaucratic hurdles that people had to clear to get it. There, Civic Tech was able to work relatively quickly to improve things for a lot of people. What might seem like a really favorable status where you have, say, somebody who's newly elected who's really excited isn't a bad place to be, but it's not as obviously beneficial for us as when there is a clear policy. So you have to figure out, okay, where is the thing you want to work on? You have to figure out the status of the policy. And then you can think about, well, what kind of work would be most useful to do? So just thinking about what you might call levels of the intellectual stack. You might just write new content for a form or for a web page or for a letter. You might teach public servants how to do user research or help them do it. You might build new forms or new templates. You might replace the whole CMS. You might bring in databases or APIs or better technology underneath the front end. Or sometimes the best play is to get the entire data IT and comms groups to work more closely together. which honestly, you almost always have to be inside and have built some relationships in order to work on. But I think it helps us be more effective when we think not just about, okay, what do I want to work on and where does that live? What's the status of the policy? Which thing is going to be most effective in making that change that I want to see in the world? And sometimes I use this list of questions. So if I wanted to relieve pain for end users, like the voters that Jose was describing, what would be the best thing I could do? It's also really valuable to free up capacity for public servants who are maintaining or stewarding a database or a website or a program. And I might want to act somewhere where I could be sure that my changes are going to last and not be swept out by a newly elected administration. Or I might just want to make sure that I have current access and support. So I wanted to share a bit of a case study, what I've been up to lately. I've been working on this for 3 years, and it is slow going, but we are making progress. California court system hears about 7.5 million cases every year. And on the non-criminal side, so talking about everything from divorces to restraining orders to small claims cases to lawsuits, evictions, name changes. On that side of the court, about 80% of cases have at least one of the people involved without representation, without any attorney. You're allowed to come to court without an attorney, but it's really quite difficult to get things done as someone who doesn't have that education. And the court's website, naturally, had last been revised in, I don't know, you could probably guess the vintage from here. It's somewhere around like 2006 to 2010. The one on the right is actually a newer piece that has been part of our project, helping people find the right court form. The California court system has a body that I work for called the Judicial Council, and one of its top responsibilities is maintaining 1,200 PDF forms without employing a single designer as an in-house employee. Luckily, every county court, and there's 58 counties, is required to have something called a self-help center where anyone can go and get some basic legal help. It's pretty basic. They can help you fill out forms. They can explain procedures to you. They can't really be your lawyer. They can't go to court with you, but they can help. So there is a policy that favors this access for people who are representing themselves. But the implementation is difficult. Before the pandemic, you had to go to almost all the centers in person. They did almost nothing online. Usually you were filling out the forms on paper with a ballpoint pen. The information was hard to read. It's legalese, so you might expect that. A lot of barriers to actually doing it successfully. You remember this happened. Once we got past this, we got to the idea of what self-help is. So self-help in the California court system means getting help from someone, as long as that person isn't your own lawyer. And it took me about a week and a half to understand what they were talking about. But we got permission to visit 20 of the 58 county courts. And this is just our team obeying a strange local rule of court, because you are not allowed to take photos inside or right in front of the Fresno courthouse, because that's a rule of court there. So we're about a block away. We are, one second, something hilarious just happened. My teenager just messaged me that she forgot her key. There's someone else home, so hopefully she can ping them. So we're about a block away, obeying that rule of court. Here's what we found inside. If you're at the self-help center or you're elsewhere in the courtroom and you're represented by nobody, you're just there on your own, this feels chaotic and kind of prohibitive. take a ticket, lots of things on the signs about what we don't do, what we will not have, turn your phone off, and a whole bunch of things about what isn't allowed in the courtroom. Backstage, where the clerks of court work, it's a lot more orderly, but it's still very 20th century. There's lots of packets of 8.5 by 11 paper and lots of stamps that the clerks use to physically stamp papers. So a lot of people made trips to court that they didn't need to make if they just could have gotten some information. So we're building a website, and that sounds like not the most exciting technology project, but all of the things that go into it, from plain language procedural content, meaning helping attorneys write about 15 grade levels lower than they are accustomed to write for their peers, creating easier ways for people to fill in court forms and better instructions for them. We've built a lookup feature to help people figure out what courthouse they should go to for a particular matter and when it's open. We have 58 county courts, but about 256 courthouses. And in some counties, there are only a couple of courthouses that you can go to do, let's say, a restraining order. We've also worked on a lookup for the forms to help you find the right form for what you need to do. And just as an opportunistic thing that came along here, we helped with, was already a little bit in flight, an application for people to reduce their traffic fines if they can't afford them. So when you say a website and dig a little deeper, there might be more to that. And it's improving. This is some of the work we've done on the most common civil court procedure, which is getting a divorce. We have built step-by-step instructions and timelines and things that work on people's phones and other devices that are not full-sized computers. And we go, if you were to look at the site, pretty deep into the step-by-step of exactly how to file your forms, how to serve your forms to the other party, what to do if you get served a divorce, how to avoid court, how to go to court, how to finish up a judgment, and ultimately get through the entire process. If you can see well enough on the screen to see that the first sentence of the content there on the left is getting a divorce takes at least 6 months. One of the biggest problems that they had in the court help centers was that people would come in and believe that they could just be divorced in about a week. One of the other problems is that people wouldn't know how to take the next steps, and so things would drag out and it would take 3 years, even though both parties were pretty agreed that it was time to separate. So we're trying to do some things like set a basic expectation of how long things are going to take, how to think about the process in 4 major stages, and then how to break it down further all the way down to specific steps to complete that you can get on your phone without a lot of graphics so that it's accessible to people who don't have a lot of data or who don't have a strong broadband where they are. I want to talk about a particular, I don't want to quite call it a battle, that's a little too warlike, but something that came up. As we started working with lawyers, asking them to write more simply, the objection we kept getting was, but we have to be accurate. And we said, well, yes, sure. You know, that's not very exciting as a design value, but we're 100% with you. The content has to be accurate. And we realized as we went along that if you're an attorney, accuracy has been drummed into you since law school to mean you need to be comprehensive and you need to be precise. And the way that you'll find out if you've been comprehensive and precise enough is that another lawyer or a judge will poke holes in what you've written. And so that's, you know, upsetting and to be avoided, and also just how they're used to working. And so they are writing to defend against an attorney or a judge with at least an equal education to themselves poking holes in their content on the grounds of comprehensiveness or precision. So we started to ask the question, okay, let's recognize that as a real definition of accuracy. That's important. But let's also look at whose accurate understanding we are aiming for on a website that's going to be used on somebody's mobile device. What if a regular Californian reads the content that is comprehensive and precise and doesn't understand it and goes off and does the wrong thing? Or should we call that accurate, actually? And to me, so much of the work is about this kind of thing in the underlayers. It's about tech, but it's also about some of the things that tech makes concrete, like getting really clear about what you mean by accuracy and whose accurate understanding you're going for. So now we have an informal standard that for a web page on the site I was just showing you, what we want is for a typical Californian to be able to take away an accurate understanding of their next step in the process. There's a few other things implied by building a website. They had a terrible proprietary CMS. So we have been moving them to Drupal. We have been building a legal design system based on the United States Web Design GSA maintains. Right before I came here, we had a little incident where we took down about 15 of our 65 sites through a daytime deploy that wasn't well set up. So we're working on those release processes. We've been coaching on all kinds of digital practices. And in some ways, possibly the biggest change and the most important thing we've done was hire somebody into a new position called a web content attorney. This is an actual permanent government position. And this person is someone whose judgment on whether something is accurate can be authoritative, and who also understands web and knows about writing content. And the existence of a person with both of these capabilities in one body that kind of everybody from the tech world and from the legal world recognizes as authoritative on this has really changed the way that our partners think about the web and think about content. So it's a strange administrative thing, but something we take a lot of pride in. And we are starting through some proxies like web analytics and satisfaction reports to see that people are finding it easier to do some of the things where we've already published the content, finding it easier to get to the end of their case. And we hope eventually that that's going to allow the people who help to help with harder issues. So I think all of us in this field want more people to join us. And of course, the work that you all are doing is a huge part of that. There are also government digital groups at many different levels. There are a world of product companies out there who make products specific to government. So I'm thinking of things like Seamless Docs, which makes tools for converting PDF forms into web forms and saving the data, or Remix, which is for transit planning, or Esri, which is for all kinds of geodata. There are a whole bunch of consultancies, many of them design-oriented, and there are a lot of mutual aid groups. So the opportunities are enormous. But we need a few more things if we're to welcome a huge number of people into our field. I've said before that we are kind of a teenage field. If I started in 2010 and I wasn't among the first, it's 2021. So we're 12 or 13 or some kind of awkward age. We've learned a lot though, and we want new folks in the field to be able to skip some of the mistakes I know I made, maybe some of the ones you made, make some advanced mistakes instead. One of the things we really need is a shelf of books. I wrote mine partly in hopes of catalyzing it. A couple more have come out, and there were a few in the past. I hope everyone on this call will think about whether now or in a little while you have interesting material for a book, maybe about your specific field in civic tech, or maybe about a project that you've done, or maybe a philosophical book. It has helped enormously that this is a physical book that people can hold in their hands and that people can recommend to others who want to know about how to do this. So please, please think about writing a book. And if you want to talk to me about it, reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about the process. We also need to work on paths for junior people. And I see the brigades and other similar groups as really important onboarding places for junior people who aren't quite ready to take on the coaching responsibilities that come with a full-time government role, to learn about civic tech and get some projects under their belt and learn from folks like you. I've also been thinking more and more about how we need to collect what we've learned in some kinds of archives, and we need to reach out to academics who study things like effective government and technology in the public sphere and connect with what they're doing and get their rigorous evaluation of what we're doing. And finally, and I think really importantly, we need all of us to stay in one piece. And I'm so glad that there are communities like this to work in. And I appreciated everything that was said about there being a code of conduct and about this being a safe place, because this work is really difficult and it goes much, much better if we're working together and supporting each other and learning from each other. So that's all I wanted to say on my own. And I hope you have some questions for me.
Thank you so much, Cyd. I have to admit, I've done a couple of screenshots. Amazing information. Thank you so much.
Oh, good.
Guys, as I told you, there's a Q&A section. I'm gonna have to mute because my dogs are acting out.
I totally understand.
Your turn.
Let's see. Oh, I see. There's a Q&A.
So first of all, Cyd, thank you so much for taking the time not only to be here with us, but to also teach from your past experiences and really just put this information out there in a way that I feel with this talk the same way I felt when I read your book. That it's like, this is exactly how I feel, and now I know the words to say it. Which
that means a great deal to me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
which is very much how I felt after like reading your book, especially certain areas where it's like I couldn't express it. So I've had conversations with people in our community, especially in Code for Puerto Rico, where if civic tech is new in the US, it is very much new back home, right? Yes. I would venture to say that we have a special relationship with government where sometimes people just don't see that they can do something at that level. Yes. So I think to start off with some questions, what have you found most difficult about reaching out to government and government-like agencies to do this kind of work?
It's a great question. I usually start at the beginning by thinking, maybe it's their lack of knowledge of tech, and so explaining myself is difficult. And then I usually realize as I'm getting into it that it's my lack of knowledge of the specific agency or the specific mission that is impeding the conversation. And so the more I can find people who are already working on something and work to support them if they have already learned things and built relationships, that is an incredibly powerful way to do it. sometimes, sometimes there are just reasons that people can't say that they can't do something. Leadership doesn't allow it, the budget doesn't allow it, and there's not a way to say that, especially for people who may be afraid of press coverage or not have had an interaction with somebody who does this work before. All of those things can get in the way. So it helps to be part of an organization, I think. It's probably easier for all of you as part of Code for Puerto Rico than as individuals. If you were asking, can I see your database? Yeah.
Funny you should mention database. I think Jose and I had a conversation along those lines a couple of days ago.
Oh boy.
Jose, do you have anything to add or questions before we continue to other questions that are written down?
Nope.
Okay. So we have another question here. So you talked a lot, or gave hints a lot around communication and how you need to maybe change the way you express yourself because you might not have all the information, how to approach these situations. Is there in your view, a good way to communicate to non-technical government partners, how to focus, how not to focus on the implementation details when you're still in like this discovery phase where nobody knows what they don't know?
Right. That's a great question. I think this has often happened to me when the government partner doesn't know what a discovery phase is or thinks they've already finished it. So they're like, we've done our requirements gathering, or we did some user research a couple of years ago and we handed you what we found. So why aren't you just implementing it? And by the way, I'd like the color scheme to be purple. Or I am working with a lovely partner right now who was like, so I would like to build a cart check-in app that's kind of like Starbucks, where you order ahead and then pick up the coffee that you ordered from your car. And, we sort of had to say, okay, that's really interesting. Let's talk about what problem we're solving with a check-in app. Should we say app, or should we just maybe say check-in process while we decide that it's an app? If it's an app, we just sort of gently start fencing it down to the real question, which is, what problem are we trying to solve and who's involved? Bringing people along on user research is magic. If you can get permission to do user research, because it helps them see the questions and buy into the answers if they're real people giving them. That's another hack as well, I think. I could talk for an hour about that alone, honestly.
Okay. I'm checking the other chat and making sure that there's no questions that might be being asked. So speaking to that of the user research part.
Yeah.
I've seen it be incredibly well done. I've had the fortune of being part of like teams that they have their like laser focused. They have buy-in and air cover and like rainbows are everywhere, and it's like complete
It's
magic.
amazing. Yeah,
it's amazing, and we have these user journeys on the walls and on the floor and beautiful stuff. But I've also seen when they don't have that, right? And like the slog that it could be. Is there anything that communities and organizations like Code for Puerto Rico can do to help these teams have like some sort of impact, not only in government but also in communities? And maybe is there a way where we can provide that sort of air cover in an efficient way to just make them successful?
What an interesting question for user research in particular. I have, I have seen teams do things like Open Cities did a few years ago, where they did a baseline of city websites in the United States and invited people to just, check out how their city had done. And it wasn't very judgmental. It was just sort of, here are some facts about your website, and here are some facts about the typical website, and here's some facts about a great city website. I think one thing to remember is that interviewing people isn't the only kind of useful research. And so if that is blocked, which it often is, right? There's a lot of people who think it's illegal. There's a lot more people that are uncomfortable with it. There are other ways to pick up the voice of the user or to show the real experience. On a study I worked on last year, it was about unemployment systems falling over in the first few months of the pandemic. And we made a timeline of how long it took each of our participants to get benefits, and what they were doing at each stage of the process. And it was really, really effective. But, and we got them from interviews, but it wasn't sort of asking you to participate in a woo process. It was like pretty concrete data.
Okay.
And then I think understand what they want.
As in the teams, or just the people that you're trying to make a solution for.
So all of the people that you're trying to make a solution for. So the end users, the people who are going to be served, are most important. But there's a lot of barriers to public servants being closely connected to those people sometimes. And if you can reconnect the public servants to seeing the people, or understand what the public servants are dealing with in terms of constraints, sometimes it's budgets, sometimes it's administration policies, sometimes it's just a misunderstanding about something. It takes being really non-judgmental and finding those relationships. But where it does something they want, they may support it.
Okay. So we have a question from our host. How do you know you have the right stakeholders or buy-in on board before a civic tech project? It's the $1,000 question.
Right. I mean, it's almost impossible before. You can take some good guesses, but you usually find out in the middle that you got something wrong. You need somebody else's buy-in. I often feel a little worried if I don't have a compliance person involved, because I've been bitten so many times by the approach of, we'll talk to compliance later. And I'm like, no, let's make friends with compliance now. Let's tell them the broad outline of what we want to do and how we're going to pilot it. And then when we go talk to them in 6 months, it's not going to be a surprise. And asking in a discovery process or a kickoff meeting, who else is involved in this? Is there any other agency? Is there anybody that you depend on in doing this? Is there a secret vendor that you haven't mentioned to me yet? That happens all the time. And just being really open. Oh, there is a vendor. Well, I'd love to meet them.
Okay. So Meredith asks, what kind of projects or initiatives do you see as well suited for volunteer power in the civic tech ecosystem, and which ones are not well suited to volunteer power? For example, procurement constraints.
Right. Fixing internal processes is really difficult to do with volunteer power. So that capacity building and so forth. But volunteers have achieved amazing things in the last year and a half. I consider the COVID tracking project, which a journalist at The Atlantic and a UX person put together, to be a civic tech project. It patched a government responsibility that wasn't happening. Now, the key thing there is The Atlantic is a minor institution in its own right and was able to give them a lot of support. But they ended up with close to 500 volunteers working on that. and being the canonical source of COVID data in the United States for the final year of the Trump administration. So volunteers can do a lot, but I think, volunteers should only take on something that large where government is really neglecting a duty.
Okay.
Most volunteer projects, I think, should aim to be integrated into government at some point. That's just an opinion, and I don't think everybody agrees with me, which is fine. But volunteers can start things that are hard to start internally.
Okay.
The Get CalFresh project fairly famously just built an alternate interface for a food stamp application. And that would have been hard to do for the 9-county coalition that was technically running the application.
Okay. Fantastic. So the next question is from Angie, I presume. I'm going to skip that and get people that haven't asked have their questions read. So Jose Cuevas asks, as a group, any tips on how you can break through the status quo in local government, gain visibility and access to stakeholders?
There is a positive way and a negative way, and you only want to deploy the negative one with great care. The positive way is do something that they think is cool or that really helps them. The negative way is, do a tear down or something and get them negative exposure in the press. That's definitely a mechanism that governments understand, but it doesn't really help you build the partnership. Sometimes the need is great enough that it's worth doing that, but like I said, something to be used with real care.
Edwin Torres asks, how can Puerto Ricans contribute to improving federal government from a diversity perspective?
Fantastic question. On the tech side, 18F and USDS are hiring like crazy right now, and 18F is permanently remote. You do not have to move to DC. If you're open to moving to DC at some future date after the pandemic, then USDS is also a great option. I don't think I have ever worked in a federal or state government agency that didn't sort of lament how few Spanish speakers it had. This is on them, on us, I should say, because I've been part of some of them. But it is an enormously in need, just basic capability that, Canada, for example, does a much better job of working in both French and English in their national digital teams. United States does a terrible job and is always sort of like, oh, it's cool. We have one person here who's Latino, and we have one person who speaks Chinese. Now, what do we do with that in terms of a multilingual capability? It's pathetic. That said, people who can do, for example, user research in Spanish are incredibly valuable. I would give a lot to have not just one, but a couple on my team in California, because I think it's important if you are doing research in multiple languages that each language community can talk to each other and do primary synthesis in the language they're doing research in before you try to merge it all together.
Does it lower intimidation factor, and does it make the process more theirs? Okay. Yes,
definitely. I mean, and California has a lot of immigrants for whom Spanish is a second language because they speak some indigenous language as their first. And so they are already taking a step into a language they're less comfortable with when they're speaking Spanish. And if they then have to be interpreted into English, it's really not ideal for they're getting across what they need to.
Okay. I want to be respectful of time. Angie, how are we doing on time? And Cyd, are you willing to answer more questions?
I am, but I will let Angie cut me off.
I am good if Cyd is good for maybe one or two more. And I mean,
okay. Some more questions from people that haven't asked questions are coming in. I would very much like to get to them if you're willing to, Cyd.
People can also look at the Q&A and vote up and down the questions also, so that way, if we have to pick one or two, they can help us do it.
So we have a question from Anonymous. How do you overcome the government desire for documentation and certainty when what is needed is discussions and exploration of possibilities?
This is a great one. I think there's more than one school of thought on how to do it. I think my favorite is to put together a lot of certainty about how we're going to do the exploration and what we should expect to get out of it. So, I write research plans for tiny studies for which I wouldn't normally write a research plan. I write up reports for every little sprint of 5 sessions that I do. I try and get people more comfortable with the idea that we're not trying to get to, we're not trying to get to a final today. We are trying to understand where we have alignment and where we don't. Today's purpose is to question assumptions. And let's do a documentation exercise where we write down our technical and experience assumptions. That works, a decent percentage of the time. And then we end up writing more things down as we actually resolve the questions.
Okay.
But I consider it like a huge step forward when my partners are bringing out drafts that aren't done, things that aren't polished, starting to talk about ideas.
Cool. So Dana Montenegro, I think this question is interesting, primarily because it comes from a provider point of view. Any advice for those of us who are service design and software engineering firms working within government and using design on how to better work with volunteer efforts?
That's a really interesting question. And, these firms are incredibly important parts of the ecosystem and do a tremendous amount of the design and build work. You're obviously in a contract space. You're probably very concerned with tracking everything and making sure that, things are paid and things are accounted for, whereas volunteers are out here on the weekends, probably not even working hours, doing what they're doing. I suspect that there are similar motivations in creating spaces that are specific for volunteers rather than sort of just acknowledging that you're on different footing. If you're working 35 hours a week on something and the volunteer has 3, helping scope things that they can help with, but also channels where they can give you ideas or critiques, because then they function as a really useful outsider to the project to be able to sort of bring a different perspective, are all possibilities.
Well, on a selfish note, Dana, if you do want to talk to a volunteer organization, you know me and Angie and Jose really well, reach out and we can talk. So for our last question, so Angie asks, we talk a lot about projects that work. Can you give us examples of bad practices and things or practices to stay away from? Common blockers to good civic tech.
So, one of them, I think that often seems attractive to people who are new, is getting closely associated with an elected official. And this has happened to a few teams famously. Mayor changed in Philadelphia, the whole team got kicked out. GDS lost a ton of power when the Tories came back in Britain. So while you want high-level support, being really careful specifically about being associated with somebody's political program so that's a problem practice. I think we can probably all think of the problem practice of, what I want to do? I want to build a voting app on blockchain. I'm just going to start that. So another one is getting excited about the most advanced technology when it isn't needed, or taking on something for, that you don't actually have the expertise for is fine for messing around on a volunteer pilot project, and not so fine when it's something critical or life impacting. So just knowing where you're operating. We had a fail with the Iowa caucus during the 2020 election that you might remember, and that was a very Civic Tech aligned group that did that work. I'm not going to name them here. You can look it up. But looking at it later, a lot of people said, wow, a more experienced group wouldn't have taken this project for this amount of money and would have known that this was likely to cause problems. So just knowing what level of criticality you're working at and making sure that you're ready to work at the one that you are, I think is very important. The biggest one, of course, is failures of humility. Like me walking into the courts and saying, I know lots about government, and them saying, so what? All of us as technologists are carrying this kind of privilege of like, well, everybody thinks we're smart and tells us we know a lot. And, we tend to make assumptions about what's going wrong in government. So that I'll close with as my final, not best practice. And it's something we can all work on avoiding.
It feels like my first month in the USDS. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
All time. Come on.
Yeah. Sounds like the first month I went to CMS.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, no, actually.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you worked in health. That's cute. That was the conversation more or less around there. Yeah.
Right. Wow.
Yep. So, Cyd, I cannot. Eric, I'm sorry to have to not ask that question. To be respectful of time, we will have a networking area. Maybe we can get to it there. I want from the bottom of my heart to tell you how appreciative, at least I am, and I know the Puerto Rico community is. We do not get people of your caliber and of your knowledge to take time sometimes and just express your experience in a way that is so relatable and so actionable. So I really want to say and express our appreciation for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to seeing some of you thinking about books and doing amazing work, and seeing you around the space.
Fantastic. So let's go into some special announcements so that we can start closing out at least the webinar part of it and go into our networking session. One moment.
Thank you so much, Cyd. I hope you fix your teen situation. I have one myself.
She is now inside the house. Yes, I told her to text her dad.
Very good.
That works. That works. All right. So,
thank you.
We're gonna do some housekeeping. So we thank you so very much for everything, and we'll keep in touch. Again, round of applause on the chat for Cyd Harrell. All right. Thank you, Cyd.